choose to define sex as one's biological classification of as female or male. Now, obviously, some people think when they hear the term sex of sexual activity, and that's fine. But for test purposes, I'd like for you to recognize that this is the way the authors define sex. Now, the term gender is the term that the authors of our textbook used to refer to the psychological and social characteristics associated with being male or female, defined especially by one's gender identity and learned gender roles. So sex is more biological in terms of male and female. Gender is more psychological or sociological in terms of male or female. Now, on the biological side, on page 359, one of the things that we know is that the X chromosome, and remember when we looked at developmental psychology, when we were looking at the Punnett square, we looked at the chromosome. And remember, we have pairs of chromosomes, 23 pairs of chromosomes. And that 23rd chromosome is the X or the Y chromosome. And what I'd like for you to know for test purposes is that the X chromosome, for matching purposes, is the female chromosome contributed by the mother, produces a female when paired with another X chromosome, and a male when paired with a Y chromosome. And then you can see also on page 359, Y chromosome. The male chromosome contributed by the father produces a male when paired with an X chromosome. Father may give either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome to their offspring. So it's really the father that determines the gender of the child. Primary sexual characteristics on page 361. Sex is defined by the genitals and internal reproductive organs. Obviously, when we talk about the genitals, we're talking about the penis in the male, and we're talking about the vagina in the female, and then the reproductive organs. We're talking about the testes and the ovaries and the uterus. These are the reproductive organs, and these are what we consider primary sexual characteristics. Secondary sexual characteristics, sexual features other than the genitals and reproductive organs, such as the breast, body shape, facial hair, and so forth. So for test purposes, I'd like for you to make that distinction between the primary sexual characteristics and what we refer to as the secondary sexual characteristics. On page 363, you can see terms that I'm sure that you could figure out without reading the book. But gender identity, one's personal private sense of maleness or femaleness as expressed by an appearance, behavior, and attitude. So it's one's perception of whether they are male or female. That's our gender identity. And then on page 365, the term gender role. You can see the pattern of behaviors that are regarded as male or female by one's culture, sometimes referred to as sex roles. So these are expectations. In our culture, males are expected to behave in a particular way. Females are expected to behave in a different way, and we refer to these expectations as the gender roles. Now, sometimes these gender roles are so scripted narrowly that we refer to them as gender role stereotype. Overly simplified, widely held beliefs about the basic characteristics of men and women. Many women object to the sexual gender stereotype of that women should, the role is to cook, clean, and have babies. Obviously, that's an oversimplification of a gender role. So, we've tried in many ways in society to get away from some of these stereotypes that we have about gender. And in doing this, Sandra Ben, a psychologist, has coined a term called androgyny. You can see this on page 367. You can see that androgyny is the presence of both masculine and feminine traits in a single person, as masculinity and femininity are defined within one's culture. Now, examples of androgyny. I've got blue jeans on today since I'm in front of a sort of empty classroom. I just got up and threw on a pair of blue jeans. If we had ladies in the class, if this was a regular class, there would be ladies in the class with blue jeans. This is an example of androgyny. At one time, ladies were expected to wear dresses. Men wore pants. I have my tennis necklace here. This is androgynous. At one time, women were thought to wear jewelry, and men were not thought to wear jewelry. So, we've become more androgynous in our society. Some people feel this is good. Some people are concerned about, we've become overly androgynous. But certainly androgyny has sort of relieved some of the pressure of many of these gender role stereotypes. Leave out, for test purposes, these stages of sexual arousal. Masters and Johnson, who some of you may have heard of, did some really interesting research in terms of what happens to us sexually when we get sexually aroused. And if you're interested in this, certainly you can look at these stages of human sexual response that Masters and Johnson talked about. I was very fortunate before I taught a course in human sexuality to go to the Masters and Johnson Institute. And they're scientists. They approach this topic of sexuality in a very scientific way. And so it's interesting research, it's interesting reading, but in the interest of time, I'm going to leave that up to you if you want to go and take a look at that. Now, one of the things that many women especially object to is what's referred to as a double standard. And you can see this on page 377, applying different standards for judging the appropriateness of male and female behavior. That we hold males to one standard, we hold females to another standard. And one of the things that really has upset a lot of females is that if a male and female are doing comparable jobs, many times, and in fact most times, even today, the male is going to make more money. So this is what we would refer to as a double standard. Something that we wish that we didn't have to talk about, I think we've had a couple of research findings related to this, but the term on page 379, forcible rape, sexual intercourse carried out against the victim's will under the threat of violence or bodily injury. And then something again that we wish that we didn't have to talk about, but is a reality, and this is sexually transmitted disease, a disease that is typically passed from one person to the next by intimate physical contact, a venereal disease. And I think we have alluded to this before in terms of the research findings, at least in one of my classes I did, maybe not this one. But obviously, anyone who is sexually active has to be concerned about sexually transmitted diseases, especially the viral kind. And those that are bacterial-based can be treated with antibiotics, but the viral type, for instance, herpes, genital warts, and AIDS, these are gifts that are given for life. So sexually transmitted disease, obviously a reality in our society. Okay, going to the questions, and the first one is very, very simple, just matter of fact. In terms of distinguish females and males, in terms of genetic sex, hormonal sex, and gonadal sex. So in terms of genetic sex, something we alluded to before. Females are characterized by XX chromosomes. Males, XY chromosomes. Okay, so for test purposes, for genetic sex, females, XX, males, XY chromosomes. So don't just say XX and XY, it's chromosomes. XX chromosomes, XY chromosomes. Hormonal sex, there's a lot of ways to classify these hormones, but our book simply refers to them as estrogens and androgens. So it's estrogens for the female, and for males it's androgens. Now I would forgive you if you put for the male testosterone, because that's the main androgen, but the way the book classifies it, estrogens for female and androgens for males. Gonadal sex, this is the presence of ovaries in females and the testes in the males. So the gonads are a general term to refer both to ovaries and the testes. So ovaries in females and testes in males. Okay, number 2, sexual orientation. Obviously, at some point, people become sexually interested in other people, and so the question, who is that other person? Most of the population are heterosexual, which means that they are of one gender and are sexually attracted to individuals of the other gender or sex. Well, I guess we should use the term sex here. That's the way the textbook uses it. So it's a person of one sex who is sexually attracted to a person of a different sex. A male who is attracted to females. A female who is attracted to males. Now we know that most of the population are heterosexual. It's hard to get hard data on this, but somewhere, probably a little more than 90% of the population are heterosexuals. We know that homosexuals are the opposite. They are people of one sex who are attracted to individuals of the same sex. Male attracted to male, female attracted to female. And obviously this is a hot button issue both politically and socially right now in terms of gay marriage, but we won't get into that. For test purposes, I'd like for you to simply define that orientation, which all of you probably already know. Bisexual, a person who is attracted to both sexes. A male who is attracted both to males and females. A female who is attracted both to females and males. Now the one that's not listed in the book, and it's really unfortunate because it's the largest, it's the fastest growing segment of the population in terms of what people report, and it's the most interesting in terms of what's going on psychologically with an individual, and the most confusing, quite frankly, is transsexual. A transsexual is a person who is of one sex who mentally thinks they are the opposite sex. So it is a male who is physically male in terms of their genitalia, but who mentally thinks that they are female. It is a female who is female in terms of their genitalia, who thinks that she is a male. Now there's a lot of sort of attention given to some high-profile transsexuals. For instance, Chastity Bono was a little girl who grew up to be a woman who felt that she should have been a male. So she went through the sex change operation and is now Chaz Bono. I'm a tennis player. One of the early ones was Richard Rankin, who was an ophthalmologist, but also a very good tennis player. And he decided that he was a female, so he had a sex change, and he became Renee Richards and actually played on the female pro circuit for a while, which was very, very controversial. So again, this one is not listed in the textbook, but it is a person of one sex, physically, who thinks that they are they should have been the opposite sex. Now, many of these people opt for sex change operation to sort of realign their physical bodies with what they mentally think they are, which makes for an interesting discussion. And if anybody is interested, once we come back, I'll be glad to sort of elaborate on transsexuality because it is such an interesting